This lesson is on calculator use for trig functions, cofunctions, and complements. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to type things into our calculator. This is the calculator part of the notes. We're going to figure out how to type some of these different things in. You'll notice on your calculator there should be a sine, a cosine, and a tangent button. And so the first one is just basic plugging in. You do not have to put the little degree symbol. You just need to be in degree mode. So check your mode under your mode button and make sure it is in degrees, because that's all we're working with right now. And then hit the tangent button and then 29.7. And it should just pop out with the answer of 0.57, and I'm going to round off because that decimal does continue forever. So we're just going to round off here. So you have the sine, cosine, and tangent that you could just type in. Now, B is secant. We don't have a secant button. We don't have secant, cosecant, or cotangent. That is why we learned those reciprocal functions. Secant is 1 over the cosine. So we are going to need to type in 1 over the cosine of 48. So when you do that, 1 divide cosine 48, you should get 1.49. And then finally, example C has degrees, minutes, and seconds. And you have to remember where to locate those. So I'm going to hit sine. I'm going to put 84. You're going to go second apps, which is your angle menu, and get your degree symbol. So it'll look just like you're seeing it here. And then you're going to type in the 10. Go second apps, which is your angle menu again. Go down to the second one, which is your minutes mark. Type in your 39, and then remember that your seconds mark is second plus, or excuse me, alpha plus. It's in a different location. It's not in the angle menu. So alpha plus to get the seconds mark. And then when you hit enter, it should give you 0.99 or 0.994, however you're rounding. And so those are just locating where to type things in on your calculator. Okay, example 2 kind of builds on that. We are going to be given a sine value and asked for the angle. So it says find the acute angle to the nearest tenth of a degree, whose sine value is approximately 0.20113. So they're saying that the sine of our angle, I'm going to use theta here, is 0.20113. Whenever you're missing an angle, you're going to have to do the inverse. You'll look above the sine, cosine, and tangent buttons on your calculator. You'll see a sine with a little -1, a cosine with a -1, and a tangent with a -1. Those are inverses, meaning that our output would be an angle there. So to get theta, because our problem was sine, I'm going to use sine inverse. And then when it opens up the parenthesis, you're just going to type in 0.20113 and close that out. And it should just give you the angle. And in this case, that angle is 11.6. And that would be degrees, since our calculator is in degree mode and we haven't dealt with any radians or anything yet. So everything is in degrees here. Just make sure that you're answering the correct question. We are finding an angle here, so I found an angle and I made sure to put its units, which are degrees. Alright, for example 3, we have a paint crew that has purchased new 30-foot extension ladders. The manufacturer states that the safest, that's supposed to be an F, safest placement on a wall is to extend the ladder to 25 feet and position the base 6.5 feet from the wall. What angle does the ladder make with the ground in this position? So, we're going to draw the situation. I'm going to have a wall and I'm going to have the ground. And even though the ladder goes up to 30, they say to only extend it to 25 and lean it against the wall. So here's my ladder. It's extended to 25. It says to position the base 6.5 feet from the wall. So the bottom of the ladder is 6.5 feet away. And then the question is, what angle does it make with the ground? So the ground being here, I'm going to call this angle theta, and I'm going to try to find that. So this is kind of a play on the last example. We are missing an angle again. I do have to decide whether it is sine, cosine, or tangent. And you do that by paying attention to what two sides you have. So I have the adjacent side and the hypotenuse. Adjacent and hypotenuse go with cosine. So cosine of theta is 6.5 over 25. Now, because I'm missing that angle, I'm going to use the inverse. So this one will be a cosine inverse, 6.5 over 25. And we'll just type that in. And that's 74.93. And again, this is an angle, so I'm going to put the degree mark there. And that pretty much answers this question. Cofunctions and complements. We're going to go over these two vocabulary words here. Two angles are complementary when the sum of their measures is 90 degrees. Now this is something that you may have learned about in a previous math class. So basically any pair of angles that adds up to 90 is considered complementary. So like 20 and 70, those add up to 90, so those are complementary angles. 35 and 55, those add up to 90, so those are complementary angles. Alright, so what matters to us when we're talking about complementary angles is their relationships. And in our special right triangles lesson, we talked about how 30 and 60 had the similar values for their trig functions, and that was because they came from the same triangle. Well, these complementary angles would be the acute angles in a right triangle, so it works the same way. The sine of an angle is the cosine of the angle's complement. So an example of that would be the sine of 37 is the same thing as the cosine of 53. 37 and 53 add up to 90, so the sine on one is the cosine of the other. It also works for tangent and cotangent. Again, I'm using that 37 and 53. If I have the tangent of the 37, that is the cotangent of the 53. And then the secant and the cosecant, those match up as well. So the secant of 37 will be the cosecant of 53. So those pairings, these pairs of functions are called cofunctions. Okay, so that's our second vocabulary word in there. But these relationships we're going to use to do some problems and help us figure out some values. Okay, so our example says the cosine of 20 is what of 70? And so according to the relationships that we just talked about with cofunctions, cosine of 20 would be the sine of 70 because those angles add up to 90. This is the pairing, the relationship where it works out. Now, this would also be 1 over something. This is going back to the relationships, the inverse relationships, not the inverse, excuse me, the reciprocal relationships that we talked about in our previous lessons. Cosine, you'll have to go to the beginning on this. Cosine is 1 over secant. So 1 over the secant of 20 is what we would be looking for here. So the first relationship is kind of what we're focusing on today, and this over here is kind of reminding us of the relationships we've learned about in previous lessons. So moving on to B, if I have 52 and 38, those are complementary. Tangent of 52 will be the same thing as the cotangent of 38. And then I'm going to go back to the beginning for this fractional relationship. Tangent of 52 would be 1 over the cotangent of 52. And then finally we have secant of 13 and what of 77? 13 and 77 are our complementary angles. Secant and cosecant are our cofunction relationships there. And so that fills out the first one. And then I'm going to go back to the secant. Secant is 1 over my cosine. So 1 over the cosine of 13 to play on the relationship from the previous lesson. And finally, our last example, we are going to use these cofunction relationships to find our 6 trig values, and we may have to use some of those reciprocal relationships as well. So I'm going to start. We're finding these 18s. We want the values of 72. So let's list sine of 72, cosine of 72, tangent of 72, and then my cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Now the first thing I'm going to focus on is the cofunction relationships from today's lesson. The sine of 18. 18 is the complement of 72, so the sine of 18 would be the cosine of 72. So I can just copy that number down here. And then I'm going to move on. The cosine of 18 would be the sine of 72, so the 0.9511. And again, those are from our cofunction relationships today. And then tangent of 18 would be the cotangent of 72, so 0.3249. And so those are the three that we can get from our cofunction relationships that we're learning about. The other three, we're going to have to use our reciprocal relationships. Cosecant of 72, I'm going to have to do 1 over the sine of 72. And I'm going to have to type that one in my calculator. So I'm going to get 1.05. Then secant of 72 is 1 over the cosine. So I'm going to have to, again, I can just plug that value in. The cosine of 72 we know is 0.3090. Type that in my calculator. And I'm going to get 3.2, round up to 4. And then finally, tangent is 1 over the cotangent, so I can use the reciprocal relationship here. So 1 over 0.3249, and I get 3.077, or 0.08 would be fine. But when you're asked a question like this, you could be just using some cofunctions if they gave you enough information. You could just be using reciprocals, but this is probably going to be a mixture of the two in your assignment to play on both what you have known in the past with the reciprocals and what we're learning today with the cofunctions. And the partners aren't the same. In the cofunction, the partners are sine and cosine. In the reciprocal, we're talking sine and cosecant, cosine and secant, tangent and cotangent. So learn those relationships. And that concludes this lesson.